Hello, my name is Janet Weiss, and I wrote this book for middle school children, When We Were Shadows. It's based on the true story of a little boy who hid with his family in Holland from the Nazis in many different places and areas. It starts when he's 5, leaving Germany, and it ends when they are liberated by the Canadians. I'm going to just read you a few excerpts so that you can kind of get an idea, and then you can read the story yourself. So this excerpt talks about they went from Germany to Holland, and then they were in the city of Den Haag for a few years, and then they had orders to move inland. So this is giving you a little bit of an idea of what happened. We got our orders to move inland when the Nazis discovered that the Dutch didn't support them. All Jews had to leave the big cities and give up their businesses and homes. The whole situation was confusing for me. Why did we have to move again? Would we have to run? What did moving have to do with being Jewish? Why did my friends at school get to stay in the city? What was wrong with us? Nobody really explained the situation to me, and I think that was because on the outside, I still looked like a little boy. On the inside, though, I felt like I was being stretched into an older boy before my time. The change was too fast and bewildering for me. Papa said there was a summer home in Nunspeet. Summer was over, and the home wasn't being used by the owners. Besides, not many people were taking summer vacations anymore, so we would be able to live there until the war was over. One night before we left, the butcher, who had a shop next to my father's, came to our flat. The man was tall, with a messy shock of blonde hair that would fall into his eyes. He smoked non-stop while my father and he talked. He still wore his white apron over his overalls. I could see splotches of blood and small pieces of raw meat hanging on to the stained, dingy cloth. I expected his hands to be covered in blood as well, but they were smooth and shiny with clean fingernails. "This arrangement will help us both," he said. "I'm not Jewish and can keep my shop open. If I can also keep your shop open, then you'll have something waiting for when you return." "I don't know when that will be," my father said. "There are terrible stories about the Nazis and what they're doing to the Jews. We may be deported and never be able to come back here." When I heard that, a cold chill slid down my back. Deported? I knew that fearful word. My sister and I were hiding in our room, but listening and watching through a crack in the door. I grabbed her, and she gave my hand a squeeze. "We can sign the papers," the man said. "I'll own your shop, but only on paper. When you come back, I'll return your keys. If you tell me where you're going, I can send you the income." Papa looked at the man closely. He didn't know the butcher very well. This was a time when trust could be dangerous, but what else could my father do? The years he had spent building a business and making a home were important to him. We all hoped that the situation wouldn't last very long and that we'd be home in a short while. At that time, I didn't realize what a risk this arrangement was for both men. I saw my father slowly pick up a pen and write on the papers. Then he stood up and extended his hand. The man shook my father's hand and then suddenly grabbed him in a hug. My father's head jerked back and his eyes widened. His arms slowly encircled the man and hugged him back. As the butcher turned to leave, my mother gave him a box filled with our silver heirlooms, porcelain ornaments, and photo albums, all wrapped in sheets. He said he'd look after our valued treasures while we were gone. He pointed to my mother's wedding ring and asked her if she was going to include it in the treasures. "No," she said, as a tear rolled down her cheek. She turned and smiled at my father. The man took the keys to the shop and our box and left our house. We wouldn't see him again for 5 years. The next day we packed again and said goodbye to our home. Before we closed the door to the store, I wrenched myself away from my mama and ran through the house to the backyard. I wanted to say goodbye to the cat. I looked up and raised my hand to wave, but she was gone. So there used to be a cat that would come to a roof and sit in the sun. So after a while in Nunspate, in the summer home, Walter got into a bit of a routine when he couldn't go to school anymore. So there's a little story about when he and Hank decided, Hank was his friend, they decided that they would go camping. So this is just one of the little adventures. I looked forward to the summer because Hank had a tent, and he said we could take it into the forest and camp for a few nights on our own. I didn't know if Mama and Papa would let me camp overnight because until then, Hank and I had only slept in our own backyards. Besides, I was worried about wild boars invading our tent. As it happened, Hank and I took the tent into the woods a few days after school ended for him. His father helped us set it up, and his mother gave us cheese and bread and blankets. We took pillows from our own beds and wore heavy sweaters. Our first night was our last night. It's surprising what can be heard in a dark forest when it's late. During the day, we'd hear birds mostly and wind whistling through the branches. But at night, it was different. That night, there were no bird sounds, except for the hooting of an owl and an answer from farther into the woods. Hearing the hoo, hoo, hoo gave me chills. We decided we'd go outside and search for the owl. But when we looked through the tent's entrance, we could see many eyes glaring at us from the trees. We had our lanterns, and the light must have attracted the forest creatures. I guess they wanted to see what was going on in their backyard. We retreated into the tent and tied up the doorway. Remembering the boar that we'd met months before, we wondered if he, or his friends, would come to investigate. Just then we heard a snuffling nearby. We sat there hanging on to each other, not daring to breathe until the sound went away. Then we grabbed our pillows, scrambled out of the entrance, and ran all the way home in the dark. All the lights were out at my house when I arrived. Mama came downstairs carrying a lantern and was surprised to see me. I was shaking and cold and just wanted to climb into my own bed. The next day, Hank's father took down the tent. That was the last time we tried camping in the woods. So eventually, after hiding in many different places, they ended up in building a hidden village in the forest. And in the book, there are pictures of the hidden village. So here's what it looked like. Ooh, trying to get the glare. Little huts into the ground, and people would live inside. This is what it looked like inside. There, where my finger is the table, and in the back are the bunks. And these are replica huts because eventually it was attacked and destroyed. So these are a few descriptions that Walter writes in his letters to his Oma. He's telling her about the village after it's been built. Let me describe the inside of our hut. Most have the same design with bunks lining the walls and a table and stove in the middle. I know this because I helped on all 4 quadrants. Now I'm restricted to our quadrant for safety reasons. The inside of our hut reminds me of ships I've seen in books. Wooden stakes hold up the log walls. Beds are up and down bunks. The two longer walls have 2 bunks each, end to end, and the back wall has 1 bunk. There is a row of hooks for clothing in the corner. 10 people can live in each hut, but we've been warned that sometimes we may expect 14 or more. The floors are dirt. Once a week it'll be my job to bring in soft twigs and moss to cover the dirt. Some local residents may bring old rugs for the floor. In the middle of the room, a small camp stove sits on the large table. During the day, Mama and the other women cook on the camp stove, so the smoke stays in the hut. We have no chimney, so we open the windows to get fresh air. Papa says any smells that leave the hut will mingle with the forest smells. At night, I write by the light of a gas lantern, which at the moment is getting lower. We have no privacy. Shy people dress and undress under the blankets. We wear our daytime clothing all the time in case we have to make a quick escape. We're always ready to run. You can imagine how foul-smelling a small space carved from dirt can be with 10 or more unwashed people. For the first few days and nights, I jumped at every little noise. Life is now taking on a routine. We sleep at night so our noise isn't heard by the patrols. The quiet surrounds us. Even the birds sleep. There's always someone on watch in every quadrant, day and night, and we all know the signal to run. It's the loud whistle that people make when they put their fingers in their mouths to call their dogs or get someone's attention. I dread the time we hear that whistle. I'm going to skip a little bit, talk about water. They go to a well that was dug nearby, and Walter goes with his father. We each carry 2 pails of water for the 2 huts in our quadrant. I never realized how much we depend on water and how much we take for granted. Never again for this boy. We put water in a container with a dipper for drinking. Our cooking water is never thrown out. It goes into a big pot and is used over and over for more cooking. There's 1 pail used for washing clothes. The same water is used for everyone's clothes and then can be used for bathing. People string up blankets between trees for privacy and go behind them to wash. In case we're found, people usually remain half-dressed as they bathe. I don't know what we're going to do once winter comes. Our toilet. A deep hole with a large tree branch across it for camouflage is outside. When it gets filled, a new hole will be dug and the dirt will cover the old space and the smell. We go to that area in pairs, in the dark, looking for the tree with a white cloth that marks the spot. I worry that I might miss the flag and fall in. My thighs are getting strong from squatting. We keep watch with our backs turned to give each other privacy. We talk about what might happen if soldiers come in the night and fall into our toilet holes. We laugh as silently as we can. Sometimes I have to cover my face with a pillow because I'm laughing so hard. So they go on and live in the village, and they get help from the resistance. The resistance in Holland was very strong. They worked with each other to find hiding places for Jews, and they were the ones who would warn people, come to the village and say, we have a pilot who crashed. He's going to be living in your hut for a while, and then they would come and pick up the pilot after he was recuperated and take him away. And one of the resistance people, in the book, the only real names besides Walter, who was actually the boy's real name, the only real names I used were the names of the resistance were fighters, because I wanted them to get the recognition that they deserve because each one of them risked their lives helping people. So Walter decided that he would write a letter to Mr. von Baumhauer and thank him for everything that he did. It's written in July 1944. Dear Mr. von Baumhauer, I'm hoping to give you this letter when you come to visit tomorrow. I've heard of all the help you've given to build this village and to feed and clothe us and keep us warm. I'm only 12 years old, but I know how much of a sacrifice this has been for you. Papa says you've spent a lot of your own money to help us and to hide other Jews. There's a story of how you bribed the Nazis for materials and bicycles for our friends who ride through the forest to bring us food. You spent an entire evening stealing coal from a train boxcar on a sidetrack in a nearby village. Papa says you and your helpers carried coal from the boxcar to trucks and wagons quietly and quickly so you weren't discovered. Because of you, people were warm. You and my papa are similar. People think my papa is German because of his accent, and people may think you're German because of your name. I don't know if you remember me, but we worked side by side when our hidden village was being built. You were very strong, and I remember when you brought store-bought lumber for some of the huts. Before the huts were built, I went to your house with Papa. The first time I met you and your wife, your voice was gruff, and at first I was scared. But then you smiled and patted me on the shoulder as if to say I was a little man now. I felt appreciated and have always liked you for that. Your house was beautiful, and I'd sit on the soft leather couch and watch the birds through the large windows. I remember feeling like I was in the forest even though I was inside. The trees through the windows seemed to reach in and grab me. Your wife brought me cookies and a big glass of milk. My feet couldn't touch the floor, so I sat on a pillow on the wood floor and ate my snack from the heavy oak coffee table. The lamps gave off a glow that made me sleepy, and I think I fell asleep on one of our visits. I just want to thank you and your wife for helping us and for helping to hide other Jews from the Nazis. I want you to know that we love you and appreciate your sacrifices. I don't know where we'd be now if it weren't for you. Papa says you do all this because it's the right thing to do. You want to battle the evil that has consumed our country. I hope that when this war is over, Holland will give you a big medal. Enclosed in this letter is a medal I made for you from wood. It's round and smoothed, and I carved a star on it. Gratefully yours, Walter. And at the end of the war, Mr. von Baumhauer and his wife were honored as righteous among nations for all the work that they did. Getting near the end of the book, in one of the last places that they hid, it tells about a farmhouse where there was a lot more freedom, and it was closer to the end of the war. It's called the Enchanted Farmhouse. Dear Oma, I had to write to tell you about an exciting event. We had eggs for the first time in almost 2 years. But first, I have to tell you that we are no longer on the farm. They were hiding on a farm. We are staying with a friend of Papa's in the countryside. We have been here since just before Christmas. I like it very much. Papa's friend, I can't tell you her real name, so I will just call her AC, found someone whose chickens hadn't frozen to death. She traded a jacket Mama made from one of the old threadbare blankets for 6 eggs. We melted snow on the stove and boiled the eggs. I enjoyed my egg by taking tiny bites and rolling it around inside my mouth. I hated to see it disappear. Our stove burns wood from nearby trees that Papa chops. AC miraculously shows up some days with coal in a sack. I always wonder where she got it and what she had to trade. Luckily, we have sweaters to keep us warm, so we rationed the coal for when it got extremely cold. AC told us that many people who have no fuel burn their furniture when they run out of trees. We eat soup made from tulip bulbs and potato peels. The ingredients in one pancake recipe are mashed tulip bulbs, potatoes, and water. We have potatoes because they grow well in AC's garden and keep well in the cold. Sometimes, when we have cheese, we melt a little bit onto our potatoes to get a different taste. There's no electricity, but AC has a generator that she runs with her bicycle. So some nights we have light. We take turns riding the bicycle on a rack to run the generator. We get our exercise even though we can't cycle very long on empty stomachs. On particularly cold days, we never get out of bed because it's warmer under the blankets. I've noticed that my trousers are getting too big for me, and I have to use twine to hold them up. It's time to go out and play now. The sun is shining, and it's hard to look at the snow. Today, we're going to build a snow house. I'm having so much fun here. I'll write later. And those are just a few of the readings from the book, just to give you a glimpse of what Walter experienced. Mostly it was fear. He was afraid of getting caught. He whispered for about 2 years so he wouldn't be heard. Luckily, he and his family survived with the help of the resistance. So if you are reading the book, or your teacher's reading the book to you, and you want to get a hold of me, you can find me on Facebook under Janet Riva Wees, W-E-E-S. And my publisher, Second Story Press, has a website with all my content information. You can also contact me on email. My email will be jriva, small letters, J-R-E-E-V as in Victor A, @hotmail.com if you have any questions or want to talk about the book. So I hope you enjoyed the readings today and that you get a little bit of an understanding of what Walter went through with his family during the war. And that you appreciate the people who worked in the resistance, who stood up for what they thought was right, even though it could have meant their lives. Thank you. Have a good day. Goodbye.